All right, you guys can grab your books. We'll be on 382 and grab your PowerPoints. We're going to talk about 11.3 today, and then you'll be good to go. You guys will finish up and talk to each other about 11.4, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so grab your books and let's talk about some of this stuff. So we're going to talk about blood vessels, circulation. We're going to talk about fetal circulation while the baby's still in the womb, vital signs. Some of you guys are getting this in Principles of Health Science. And then just your like normal heart rate and things like that. All right, so let's look at the structure and function of the blood vessels as a whole. So these are the different blood vessel types we have in our body. Just remember that our vascular system, vascular means vessels, okay, is like it's just like one long set of pipes, okay, in our body. And each one of these our blood doesn't just float around in our body. It's located within these pipes, and that's where your blood pressure comes from, and that's how everything gets its nutrients. So let's look at this. Okay, an artery is a 3-layered vessel. These are going to be the thickest blood vessels for the most part. Very thick. They have a lot of elastic tissue in them, and they're muscular, right? That's where that pressure, like our blood pressure, we measure it by arteries. The purpose of arteries, if you'll remember, A for artery, A for away. So arteries always lead away from the heart. A for arteries, A for away. The function in your book says it transports oxygen-rich blood away from the heart to the arterioles, influenced by the sympathetic nervous system. So that can make your arteries dilate or get smaller, right? One exception to this, okay, is that the pulmonary artery, okay, you guys remember seeing that whenever we're going through flow of blood. Pulmonary artery actually carries deoxygenated blood away from the heart because it's headed to the lungs. It still carries blood away, but the blood is not oxygen rich because it's actually the most oxygen poor blood, right, in our body because it's headed to the lungs to get some more. Okay, an arteriole is basically just a really tiny artery. So it still has 3 walls, but it's mostly smooth muscle cells. It doesn't have that big, thick, elastic wall to it. Excuse me. Capillaries, these are the tiniest blood vessels, and this is where gas exchange occurs. So tiny, tiny blood vessels. When I'm talking tiny, I mean some of them are so small that only one blood cell can even fit through at a time. I mean, that's how narrow your capillaries get. And they're only one layer of epithelial cells. We talked about those at the beginning of the year. You know, they're very, very, very thin cells so that oxygen and carbon dioxide can easily move in and out of capillaries. Venules, these are thin-walled vessels that are bundled together to form a vein. So a venule is kind of a very small vein, if you will. So it transports blood from the capillaries to the main veins. And then veins always lead back towards the heart. Typically, these are oxygen poor. It carries oxygen poor blood. But again, the exception to that one is the pulmonary vein, because even though the pulmonary vein goes back towards the heart, it actually carries blood that's been oxygenated by the lungs towards the heart. All right, so it is 3-layered, but it's thin-walled, and it's got valves. It doesn't have this really thick muscular layer. Your veins don't. And your veins are typically more superficial than your arteries. So like whenever you look at your arm, okay, and you see, right, you see all these blood vessels. Those are all veins because those are superficial. All right, let's talk about the 3 layers of blood vessels. Got 3 basic layers of your blood vessels. All right, you can see them here, right here. Tunica interna. Well, this book says intima, but I've always seen it interna, so either of those are going to be the same. It says the innermost layer, makes sense, right? Interna is composed of a single layer of squamous epithelial tissue. Remember, squamous means squashed. We talked about tissues at the beginning of the year, so those are like really flat cells. So very thin layer. So over a sheet of connective tissue. Says it provides a smooth, frictionless surface. You remember the inside of those hearts that we looked at and how smooth the walls were on the inside? They were kind of like shiny and real smooth. Okay, that's called endothelium. Right, it's epithelial cells. And that actually continues, that same type of tissue that makes up the endocardium, that really smooth layer, actually continues into the blood vessels. And so it has that same really smooth, kind of shiny layer to it. That's my spot. Okay, the tunica media, this is the middle layer, kind of like medial, right, towards the center, is a thicker layer. It contains smooth muscle cells, elastic fibers, collagen. These are all, well, at least if we're talking about arteries for sure, and veins, these are all connected to your sympathetic nervous system, right? So your veins dilate. You ever notice, like when you work out, right? Or if you've been running, you get really hot, right? Your blood vessels will dilate, your veins dilate. That's part of that sympathetic nervous system. It's called vasodilation. Vaso means vein. Or vessel, sorry. So these help to determine blood pressure. When a vessel dilates, of course, blood pressure is going to go down. When it constricts, blood pressure is going to go up. That's the tunica media. It's where the muscle tissue is, much, much thicker in arteries than it is in veins. And you can tell that here, right? So you can see the endothelium, right? The interna. Oh, that's a venule, I'm sorry. Look up here. Endothelium is here. Notice how much thicker this tunica media is on the artery versus the vein. And that's because our arteries have more muscle, because that's really where our pressure is. Veins don't have all that pressure. If you think about blood, by the time it's gotten back to the veins, it's already gone through those capillaries, so there's not a whole lot of pressure, you know, behind it. So they need some help. And what they do is in your veins, part of that endothelium or that tunica interna, that tissue folds out and makes little valves, kind of like the valves we saw in the hearts this week. And these basically make little doors so that once blood goes through, it can't get backed up again. And you can actually, a lot of times you can see your valves. If you guys will kind of dangle your arm down right beside you and kind of like cut off blood flow to your hand for just a second and kind of wiggle your hand. I want you to look at all the veins in your hand. And every now and then, like where a vein splits, you'll see a little nodule, kind of like a little knot. That usually is where a valve is located, where you see those little knots. Okay, anyway, sorry. Just reading something and may click something in my brain. Okay, tunica externa. On these, this is connective tissue. This is kind of the tough part, right? It's the outer layer. Composed mostly of fibrous and connective tissue just because it's trying to protect the vessel and the blood inside. Look at the capillary down here. one single layer of epithelial cells, right? Very, very tiny. Okay, so arteries versus veins. Walls and arteries are strong, thick, and elastic versus veins that are really thin. Pressure high in the arteries, low in the veins. Again, it can't make its way back to the heart. It needs to help with those valves. And arteries, the lumen, that's the opening on the inside. That tends to be small, veins tends to be large. Valves, arteries don't have those, and veins do, so they can prevent backflow. All right, kind of very basic there. Let's see, capillaries. All right, so these are exchange vessels, so gas, like carbon dioxide and oxygen, moves in and out of the body tissues from the bloodstream to the body tissues and back. It says arterioles connect with the smallest, most numerous blood vessels in the body, the capillaries. So they range in size from 0.0025 to 0.25 centimeters. They're so narrow that red blood cells must pass through them in a single line, one at a time. Okay. Capillary bed is virtually, you'll go back, kind of go back to this picture. So this is like a capillary bed, and that's where an area just turns into, it looks like a big net, right, of capillaries, really thin vessels, really small, and they, that's kind of where they go from being oxygenated to being deoxygenated, because that's where they change out that oxygen for the carbon dioxide. Okay. So that's that network. That's what really helps to like bathe your tissues in oxygen, are those capillary beds. Blood flow through the capillaries is controlled by what's called the precapillary sphincter. A sphincter is just a round muscle. You remember talking about our orbital sphincter or our, no, they weren't they were called sphincters. Am I just went blank? Anyway, around the mouth too. But a sphincter is just a circular muscle that kind of works like the diaphragm of a camera almost, like it closes down, you know. And they can close off capillary beds as we need to. If we're not using that particular part of our body, it doesn't need extra blood flow, things like that. Pretty cool how it works. All right, so moving blood around the body, cardiopulmonary circulation, heart to lungs, okay? So heart to lungs and back. Systemic circulation is between the heart and the body. So basically, your cardiopulmonary circulation takes place, like if we're looking at our, you know, you guys just learned the flow of blood through the heart. So cardiopulmonary circulation virtually starts with the right atrium and ends at the, I would say left atrium, I guess, or ends with the pulmonary vein. And then systemic circulation, in my personal opinion, would start at the left atrium and then go left atrium, left ventricle, aorta, all through the body, all the way back up through the vena cava. So you can kind of pick and choose as far as the heart chambers go, but that's what it's talking about, cardiopulmonary. Cardio is heart, pulmonary is lungs. I don't know if you guys read this. It says, as you read earlier, the circulatory system is an extensive network of blood vessels that stretches 60,000 miles within the body. 60,000 miles of blood vessels in your body if you were to lay them out end to end. Isn't that cool? All right. So you guys have already learned all of this. This is the direction, right? Blood flow goes through the heart. So if you need an additional picture, you can see it pretty good on here. This is very basic. Obviously, blood, it doesn't stop right here. It goes all the way out and back in. But this gives you an idea of kind of how that goes. So we won't go over that part again. We've already done that. All right, so let's look at cardiac circulation for a minute. We looked at some coronary arteries, a little bit on the heart. Okay, so coronary arteries, these are arteries that feed the heart muscle itself. So what we're saying is the heart doesn't get its own oxygen. Okay, your heart's a muscle. So we know it needs lots of oxygen, lots of nutrients to function. The thing is, because of that smooth endothelium, that smooth endocardium inside the heart, it doesn't actually take up oxygen from within. It gets fed from the outside. So what happens is right at the base of where the aorta touches, where the aorta kind of exits the heart, you have all these arteries, okay, look, right coronary artery, left coronary artery, that leave the aorta and head to the outside of the heart, okay, where it actually feeds the muscle from the outside. So you guys were able to see this fatty tissue and kind of the squiggles of the blood vessels on those sheet parts. This is really kind of what you're looking at. So these feed the muscle from the outside. So when somebody has a heart attack, typically what's happened is they get a blood clot in one of these arteries that are feeding the heart muscle. So let's say they get a blood clot up here. That means all this area where this artery feeds oxygen would die, okay, anywhere past that clot. And that's what causes a heart attack. So part of the heart dies, it's not beating the way it needs to, and that's what causes it. Okay, so that's what that looks like. Because our journey begins with the left bit. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page here. Cardiac circulation, there we go. Because the right coronary artery has two main branches that supply blood to the inferior and posterior, so the bottom and back of the heart. The left anterior descending artery and the circumflex artery. So that's what we're looking at right here. All right. Maybe it just comes back around. Anyway. That supply oxygen-rich blood to the left main coronary artery divides into two, the left anterior and the circumflex. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself on my lines here. And the coronary arteries rise from the base of the aorta and then fill when the ventricles are relaxed. And that's part of the reason why, you know, plaque and the things that we eat really tends to settle in coronary arteries that causes people to have heart problems, because this is like the first outlet. Your arteries right here, these are the first outlet where blood can leave the aorta, and so that's where they hit. Okay, one large vessel is called the coronary. It says, blood from the coronary arteries empties into several cardiac veins, which drain into a large vessel called the coronary sinus. I'm trying to see if there's a picture in here, but I don't see it. Which is located on the posterior wall of the right atrium. So yeah, you can't see it in here. So that's what they drain into. So this coronary sinus is really like a vein. All right. Okay, let's talk about hepatic portal circulation. Hepatic means liver. So just for a second, we're going to talk about liver circulation. Okay, and then we'll go from there. Just read with me on 389. So far, you've learned how oxygen is supplied to the tissues of the body. Now let's look at the way in which other nutrients like carbs, fats, and proteins are stored in or released into the bloodstream. Storage and circulation of these valuable nutrients is critical if you're to have the energy you need to perform your daily activities. Hepatic portal circulation, so we're talking about liver specifically, plays a vital role in maintaining proper carb, fat, and protein levels. This does something unusual. It says, whereas the arteries of the cardiovascular system deliver blood to different parts of the body, the veins of the hepatic portal circulation system supply blood to the liver. A little bit different. says the veins that drain the stomach, spleen, pancreas, small intestine, and colon. Think about these organs. They're the organs that really absorb our nutrients, right, from our food. So the veins that are coming from those particular organs deliver blood to the liver through the hepatic portal vein. So look at this picture, which is not on here. It's in your book on 389. You have your hepatic portal vein, right? So see all those veins, that blood's headed back to the liver. It says, as the blood percolates through the liver, some of the nutrients are removed, stored, or repackaged for other use. So your liver is the place that metabolizes a lot of the nutrients and things in your bloodstream. Your liver is also primarily one of the things that metabolizes medications in your blood. So a lot of it gets pulled out there. It says the best example is the fate of glucose. After a meal, blood that drains into the liver may be high in glucose, right? Lots of sugar or carbs. The liver plays a role in regulating blood glucose levels, stores glucose as glycogen until a later date. We've talked about that before. Extra glucose is stored as a glycogen, and it's just stored up. So later on, it's kind of like a little glucose packet, right? And you can open it up later if your body decides it needs it. Let's suppose that a person is exercising and her blood glucose level starts to drop. As this happens, the liver breaks down its stored glycogen and releases it into the bloodstream. Once blood has been filtered by the liver, then it goes back to the inferior vena cava and heads back up to the heart. So your liver helps to kind of clean it out a little bit. All right. All right, a few things on here. I know you guys can't read this on your PowerPoint, but I do want you to write down some particular arteries and veins that I want you to know. If you've got a pencil, you're welcome to kind of put a little mark beside these in your book with a pencil, not a pen, or you can list them out if you want to. I'm going to go through them pretty fast, so if you guys want to, as you're watching this video recording, you can just pause it behind each one and write it out, or however you want to do that. So on the left side of page 390, I want you guys to know the brachial artery, that's in the arm, and the femoral artery, that's in the leg. On the kind of the right side of 390, I want you to know the right and left common carotid arteries. Those are the ones up here where you get your pulse in your neck. The subclavian artery, it's like clavicle, okay? Clavicle is your collarbone. And really, you guys should know, I didn't tell you this on the right-hand side, but one other one you guys need to know is on the left side of this page, on 390, brachiocephalic artery. Because I want you to know those three that come off of the aorta, which is your brachiocephalic artery, your carotid artery, and then your subclavian artery. Those are the three that come off of the aortic arch. Okay, so on the right-hand side of 390, right common carotid, left common carotid, subclavian artery, aorta, coronary artery, and then the common iliac artery. Those are the ones I want you to know from this page. Those are what you'll have to know for the test, so make sure you can locate those. All right, on the veins, on the next page, on page 391, on the left side, I want you to know the right brachiocephalic vein, the superior vena cava, and the femoral vein. On the right side of page 391, I want you to know external jugular vein, internal jugular vein, subclavian vein, left brachiocephalic vein, inferior vena cava, common iliac vein, and internal iliac vein. Oh, and one more, the great saphenous vein is the other one that I want you guys to know. Okay, great saphenous vein is the other one I want you to know. All right, so those are the ones you guys will need to know and memorize and know where they are. All right, let's talk about fetal circulation, and you guys can turn to page 392 because I want you to see this picture and follow through. So some important things about fetal circulation. It says this is a process by which an unborn infant receives oxygen and nutrients and disposes of waste products while it's still in the womb. Okay, so that's what we're talking about specifically, in the womb. Infant receives oxygen and nutrients from the mother's blood through one large umbilical vein. The waste products are cleared through the 2 umbilical arteries in the placenta that pass through the umbilical cord to the fetus. This process is necessary because the lungs and digestive system of the fetus are underdeveloped and not yet functioning. Most blood enters the fetus through the ductus venosus, bypassing the liver and going directly to the right atrium. Right atrium by way of the inferior vena cava. We'll look at this in a second. Blood bypasses the right ventricle and is shunted to the left atrium because of an opening in the septal wall between the atria called the foramen ovale or ovale. A small amount of blood does go to the right ventricle, but then it's drained through the ductus arteriosus that connects the pulmonary artery to the aorta. So here's what I want you to look at. And think this through. Okay, the baby's not breathing on their own. So virtually what's happening is the oxygenated blood from the mom is bypassing the lungs because a little bit of it still goes to the lungs because it's going to need some blood, but it doesn't need to go there to get oxygen. That would just be wasting some of the oxygen that the rest of their body needs. So look at these things. The placenta is actually its own organ that is formed early on in the pregnancy, like in the first trimester. Okay, the placenta is its own organ. It comes out after birth. If you've ever heard of the word afterbirth, okay, that's like fluid, but mostly it's the placenta that actually detaches from the inside of the uterus and comes out with the baby. And that's where everything for the baby is attached. So very, very, very high blood flow to the placenta, lots and lots and lots of blood vessels. So notice the umbilical cord. Okay, look, it's got an umbilical vein. And again, look, the vein is red. It's not blue, it's red because that one's carrying oxygenated blood into the baby's heart. So because it's a vein and it's headed towards the baby's heart, that's why it's a vein, but that's also why it's oxygenated. There's 2 smaller umbilical arteries. Okay, and those head back out of the baby, back away from the heart or away from the baby, towards the placenta to get rid of waste products and so forth. So some other things I want you to see on here. One is this ductus venosus. So this again bypasses the liver. Okay, this is like a little extra bridge vein, if you will, that once it gets inside it kind of bypasses the liver and connects back into the inferior vena cava. And what that does is that's taking good oxygenated blood to the heart, right? The vena cava heads to the right atrium. So now what we've got is we've got some good oxygenated blood that's headed to the heart, to the right atrium. Now, I want you to look at the foramen ovale. Notice it looks like a little hole in this picture. And it is. That's exactly what it is. It's actually a hole between the 2 atria, the right and left atria. And what that does is that allows that blood, that new oxygenated blood that's just made its way into the right atrium, to go across to the left side of the heart, right? Because normally the right side of the heart is deoxygenated blood. And then it heads to the lungs and picks it up and comes back down the left side. Well, we don't want it to go through all that because it needs the oxygen. So it bypasses the lungs, not all of it, but a lot of it, bypasses the lungs and just skips on over to the left side of the heart so that it can be pumped to the body. Okay, so that's the foramen ovale. The other hole, if you will, is the ductus arteriosus. Okay, and what this is this is another little vein bridge that actually connects the pulmonary what did I say? Artery. Sorry, I was trying to figure out if it's artery or vein. The pulmonary artery to the aorta. So again, all the blood flow that didn't get passed on to the left side but kept kind of going through the right side has another opportunity to make its way into systemic circulation. So it leaves, instead of going through the pulmonary artery to the lungs, there's a little bridge from the pulmonary artery up to the aorta, okay? And that way it can go ahead and get circulated. It's pretty cool. So sometimes when you hear about babies being born with a hole in their heart, okay, all babies while they're in utero have these holes. So that foramen ovale is a normal finding. It would be normal in a premature baby, I would think. Usually it closes up right around the time of birth. And it heals. And sometimes babies can be born with this, and they still do, you know, it might close up on its own. It might not. They might have to have surgery. But that is one example of a hole in the heart. Now, there's some other ones. You could have a ventricular septal defect. So there's a hole in the ventricles instead of the atria. VSD is what that's called. Or babies can be born with what's called a patent ductus arteriosus. So instead of that little bridge that goes between the pulmonary artery and the aorta, it should close up at birth, but sometimes it stays open or it stays patent. And that can cause problems. So it might heal up on its own. It might require surgery. But those are some things that can happen. So anyways, I just wanted to explain that. I think it's a really cool way that, you know, babies in the womb, that's how they get their oxygen, you know. It's really cool to see how that works. All right, vital signs. A lot of you guys have already learned this. Most of you guys have. Taking your pulse, you guys, it's really easy to find. Your radial pulse is at your wrist, right on the radius side, your thumb side. So you should be able to find it pretty easily. You don't ever use your thumb to find a pulse. Always use the pads of your fingers. So let's count the beats for 15 seconds and multiply by 4. If you get 20 beats in 15 seconds, then their heart rate is 80. So their heart rate is considered how many beats per minute. Now blood pressure, you guys aren't going to learn how to do blood pressure in this class. That's something we learn in principles. But stethoscope and a sphygmomanometer are the two tools that you use, and you get a systolic and diastolic blood pressure. Systolic blood pressure, okay, systolic blood pressure is the pressure on the arterial walls when the ventricles are contracting. Diastolic blood pressure, that's the lower number. You know, you always see it written like 120/80. So the 120 there would be the systolic blood pressure. Diastolic would be the 80. Okay, so that's when the ventricles are relaxed. How much pressure is left in the arteries? So that's what you're looking for. Oh, these other pulses up here. So radial's up kind of on the thumb side of the wrist, down from there. Carotid is in your neck. Make sure you don't check both at the same time in case you don't want yourself to pass out. You close them off. And your brachial artery is kind of at your elbow. Now in babies, you can take a brachial artery and you actually kind of go up underneath their bicep and you'll feel their brachial artery in there. Weight. Normal blood pressure. It says 120/80 is normal. I would, pre-hypertension in here says 120/130/80 to 89. Hypertension is anything of 140/90 and higher. And that will vary a little bit, but anyway. Body mass index just gives you an idea of kind of how healthy your body is when you compare your weight to your height. Blood pressure, this is, we just talked about that. And then cholesterol is something else to watch as far as heart health goes, because that can give you an idea of just like fat levels in your body, and if you've got too much. Some people's cholesterol is just higher than others. A lot of it's genetic. A lot of it is diet. So those are some things just to watch. But that is it for this section. You guys can work on whatever else you need to work on, whatever's on the plan for today. Make sure you write down those arteries and veins and you know those specific ones that I talked about.